I bought the Dodge in late August 2010, and from then up until September 2021 it wore the black and white checkers of a flying control vehicle. I liked the fact that it was different to other Dodges, and it made a great partner to my Follow Me Jeep. When we moved to Durham in 2021, the plan was to raise the garage doors to allow the Dodge to fit inside. We booked some builders and waited. Over the months since we moved, the Dodge was parked in the back garden, covered with a tarpaulin. It stayed hiding under there until mid-June when the weather improved, and I uncovered it to let it air off for the rest of the summer. It was fairly watertight, but I did lay a plastic rubble sack over the engine to stop the water draining through from the hood hinge. In July, I gave the Dodge a service and a short test drive in preparation for the Fishburn Airfield Fly Drive-In. The following month was to be the first show for the Dodge since September 2019. It turned out that the Fishburn event would be the last time the Dodge appeared as a flying control vehicle. By late summer, we still hadn't heard from the builders, and it became clear that the Dodge wasn't going to be undercover for the winter as it stood. The garage doors would need to be raised by about 3 courses of bricks to have any hope of getting it in the garage. For a couple of years, I'd been toying with the idea of turning the Dodge back to olive drab. It had of course been impractical while living in Washington. The container wasn't big enough to do the work, and the Washington garage was full of Jeeps and also not tall enough to get the Dodge inside. The new garage in Durham had enough floor space for the Dodge and the 2 Jeeps, but it was just the door height that was the issue. Over the last few years, I'd been displaying my vehicles along with some friends, and the checkered Dodge didn't really fit anymore. An olive drab Dodge would fit with the display much better. So if I was going to turn the Dodge to olive drab, it didn't need the wooden body anymore. If the wooden body and roof bows were removed, the Dodge would just about fit through the existing garage door. It would be a tight fit, very tight in fact, but it would go in. The Dodge would then be undercover for the winter and with enough space to work on it to repaint it. So on September the 16th, 2021, the strip down and conversion began. It started with the removal of equipment from inside, such as the transmitter, receivers and other radio equipment. Then the doors, cab roof and dome were removed. Much of the bodywork was attached with coach bolts, but with some gluing of the planking around the curved corners of the roof. The roof was the last major section to be removed. The woodwork on the front bow was to be kept. It kept the wind out of the rear body and also had the structure to hold the doors closed. The canvas curtain was also mounted onto this, and these were features that I wanted to keep. The first part of the day was spent clearing some space in the garage and moving the Ford Jeep to the middle behind the brick pillar. It then took a little over 2 hours to strip the bodywork off the Dodge. It was finally stripped enough to try and get it through the door. When I measured the garage door beforehand, I knew the Dodge was going to be a tight fit. But when the garage doors are modified, I'll also be making them wider as well as taller. But what I didn't do is when I was measuring, I'd forgotten about the lifting mechanism inside the door, which sticks out into the opening, reducing the width further. This now meant that I only had around about ½ inch of clearance each side of the Dodge body. By late afternoon the Dodge was undercover and my 3 vehicles were together for the first time under one roof. The rest of the day was spent clearing up the mess, ready to go to the tip. The following day the paint stripping began. I wasn't looking forwards to the effort of sanding the entire truck to get the paint off. There were, however, areas of the front wheel arches and the bodywork where the black and white paint had peeled off on its own. I wondered how much of the paint was ready to flake off with a little bit of help, so I gave it a go with a woodworking chisel. So starting on the front left corner, I started chiseling. Flaking the paint off was definitely the right choice rather than sanding, but it was clear that I still had a huge job ahead of me. It was surprising how fast the chisel went blunt, so I kept an oil stone handy for frequent resharpening. And so it went on, and on, and on, gradually working my way down the left-hand side. Around the spare wheel step was a bit more difficult, both due to the wheel bracket being in the way and the concave step. More and more chiselling took the paint removal down the rear body of the truck. There was enough room at the back of the truck to work on the tailgate. I don't know if that had been replaced at some point, as most of the truck had around 4 layers of green paint. The tailgate only had primer and 1 layer of olive drab. There were a few areas at the back of the body that had rusted right the way through and had been filled many years ago. Now it was time to cut out this rotten metal and weld some new material in there. The backs of both rear lockers needed attention, and there were a couple of areas ahead and behind the wheel arches that also needed new metal. When the Dodge was in black and white, I'd repainted the top left of the hood, so that was only primer and 1 layer of olive drab. To the side of that, which I hadn't touched, it turned out to be olive drab straight onto bare metal. After the metal was cleaned up, it was primed straight away to stop any surface rust forming before I got around to painting it with the top coats of olive drab. Any rust spots were cleaned out with a rotary wire brush, and everywhere that I got down to bare metal, it was then primed. After working my way down the left-hand side, I worked over the top of the hood and onto the other fender. This was up against the garage wall, with little room to work, so it wasn't long before I needed to turn the Dodge around. So on September the 26th, the Dodge was squeezed back out through the doors and into the sunshine for a few pictures of the progress, before the tight fit back inside again. Then it was back to more chiselling. The right rear corner of the body had the last 9 squares to be removed. This was another area that was rusted and needed new material welding in. At the back of both fenders, there was a doubling plate at the attachment point. This was a natural water trap, and as a result, over the years, there was a considerable amount of rusting between the 2 plates. The rotten metal was cut out, and the mounting channel was cleaned up. New steel was welded into the fender to replace the rotten area, and a new doubling plate was cut. The new plate was bolted in place with a good layer of mastic sealer between the two to stop any future water penetration. The left side fender wasn't so bad, so I just welded up the holes before adding a new doubling plate. The right side of the body was sanded, primed and filled in areas where the chisel marks were deep. The left side was also done the same. The windscreen was removed next, which allowed the instrument cowl to be stripped and primed. That was pretty much all the bodywork ready for olive drab. I knew it was going to take a number of coats of paint to give a good layer, and out in the cool garage it was going to take some time to dry. There were still plenty of small parts to work on, such as radiator grille, so I planned to repaint the whole truck with olive drab, and then while that was drying, work on the smaller parts to prepare them for paint. Due to the various seams between the panels, I decided to brush paint the truck to make sure I got the paint into every corner. After the brushed coat had had a couple of minutes to dry, I went over the area with a small glossing roller to take out the brush strokes and leave a nice even finish. I started on the rear of the truck and then worked my way along the right hand side of the body. The paint was quite glossy when first applied, but dried to a matte to slightly satin finish. When I parked the Dodge back in the garage after turning it around, I left a little bit more room between the truck and the wall. This allowed just enough space to squeeze down the back and paint the olive drab on the left hand side, starting at the rear corner and working forwards. While the olive drab was drying, I worked on the lamp guards and the grille. The paint chosen was a late war olive drab from Jeep Parts. Once the olive drab was dry, it was a very close match to the original paint on the bucket seats. All the rubber seals around the screen glass has perished, and parts of the frame was rotting due to water getting trapped between the rubber and the frame. As much as possible was cut out with a scalpel, and the gap was then sealed with black mastic to stop any further water from getting in there. I worked on the windscreen and smaller parts in my workshop, as there was more space in there and it was warmer. For the next few days I alternated between painting additional coats of olive drab on the Dodge and working on the smaller parts in the workshop until the Dodge had had 4 coats over everything. It was then time to print out some test stencils to check the sizes for the markings. All of the stencils were hand cut from thin card, using a font style from an ordnance manual. The stencils were attached with masking tape and the paint applied fairly dry with the end of a glossing roller, dabbed through the stencil. It took 3 quick coats to give good coverage. I started with a water-based white as it dried quickly, but the moisture in the paint started to curl the cardboard stencil, so I switched to enamels for the rest of the markings. The hood numbers were a little bit more tricky, applied around the curved edge. The hood number itself was a best guess. From the date of delivery, I narrowed it down to 173 numbers within a batch. When saddling the front bumper, I'd found a number ending in 833, and as that fitted within the range of possible numbers, I used that. Since the hood star was so big, I didn't bother making a stencil, but just masked off the star with masking tape. The back of the truck was quite busy with stenciling. I expected the Pioneer tool rack to cover most of the tailgate, but in the end that was removed again during the next step of the conversion of the truck. The inner to outer screen seal took quite a bit of cleaning up to remove the white paint. It was glued back into the frame with mastic again to keep the water out of the framework. After some repairs to delaminating plywood, the front bow and its additional woodwork was painted olive drab. With the Dodge's name reapplied, the windscreen was finished and ready to go back onto the vehicle. By this time, the grille and light guards were painted and dry enough to be refitted. The roll-up locker lid, fitted under the meteorological station, was removed and the original lid was refitted. Some of the canvas from the original Norwegian doors was cut down and sewed to make some new chain guards for the tailgate. The originals were falling to pieces and I wanted some new ones to protect the fresh paint. With all of the remaining small fittings reattached, the repaint was completed on October the 16th, 2021, or so I thought. On the morning of the 17th, the Dodge was carefully extracted from the garage so I could take it for a test drive and get some pictures. There were a number of tools that needed moving out of the Dodge first, including the child seat so the truck would fit through the door. We stopped at a couple of places on the trip to get some photos of the new look and the 100th Bomb Group 1776 Ordnance Company markings. I shared some of the pictures online, only to be told that the 1776th was an independent organisation attached to the 100th Bomb Group but not part of it. The bumper should have read 8 star 1776 2, 2 being the second vehicle in the organisation. Since I wanted the Dodge in 100th Bomb Group markings to match my other two vehicles, 1776 was sanded off and the area painted olive drab again. The bumper was then repainted with 351 for the 351st Bomb Squadron, matching my first Jeep. So by mid-October the Dodge painting was complete in its new olive drab scheme. Most of the 5 litres of paint had been used, but I planned to get another tin when the weather warmed up to do the underside of the fenders, the steps and for future touch-ups. After having the checkered Dodge for so long, I couldn't just stop work after the repaint. The Dodge looked too normal still. While it looked great in the new colour scheme, I still wanted something that would make it stand out from other Dodges at a show. That will be the subject of the 4th and last video, completing the story of my Dodge and bringing it up to date.